Hey Exiles, Chronic Painless here with the official full patch notes update to my Blade Vortex 3.19 League Starter build guide. As expected, the actual patch notes didn't really change anything about how the build works compared to what we already knew from the Balanced Manifesto. But even though everything I said in my last video still applies, there are still a couple of new developments that are worth highlighting. The first, of course, is the rework of the unique item that is the foundation of this build in the early part of the league, Hrimsorrow gloves. At first glance, this change is certainly a buff, since we'll no longer need the cold conversion mastery and are essentially getting the final 10% conversion that we would have been missing in previous leagues for free. Losing the added cold damage to spells is minimally impactful due to BV's poor added damage scaling and will become basically imperceptible at higher levels. As for replacing the unneeded mastery, the cold exposure and curse effect increases are both very reliable sources of extra damage. On the other hand, Frenzy Charge on Shatter has the highest damage potential, but won't offer anything for large portions of many boss encounters, so use it at your own risk. Freeze Duration and Chill after Unfreeze are both entirely useless, because with our build, once an enemy is frozen, they'll almost certainly be staying that way until they are dead. The downside of these changes is that the drop rate has been reduced to account for the increased potency, and on top of that, demand for Hrimsorrows is likely to be higher than in previous leagues. So while Hrims have been the poster child for 1C uniques for years and have saturated the trade site within the first hour of dozens of leagues, there's a chance they could see a small price increase in the Lake of Kalandra League. Thankfully, this build has a contingency plan that I initially developed for use in SSF, where Hrims could never be guaranteed. Instead of going for full cold conversion, we'll do a split of conversion into cold and lightning to take advantage of the extremely powerful Trinity support. Trinity support is bar none the strongest support for elemental damage if, and only if, you can maintain maximum resonance. For our build, this is easily done at lower levels with physical to lightning support and the cold conversion mastery. This 50-40 split can be further augmented or adjusted as needed by our heralds, added spell damage, and passive point allocation. As long as we have a reasonable amount of overlap between the damage ranges on our cold and lightning damage in POE, like in the export below, we should be reliably generating maximum resonance with 100% uptime. In the past, I've taken this Trinity-based version of the build well into red maps and SSF with ease. The only reason we don't use Trinity on our normal build is that specializing in a particular element is much more cost efficient and significantly less of a hassle than trying to balance two elements, especially at higher budget levels. So unless Hrimsorrow gloves somehow becomes the new chase unique, Trinity support should provide more than enough of a stopgap until you can afford a pair. The second most impactful thing that we learned from the full patch notes is that the bug to Brittle Ground, which I mentioned in my last video, is going to be fixed. As I had hoped, Brittle Ground will now scale with increased effect of non-damaging ailments. This is a huge deal for the build. We have tons of very easy access to ailment effect scaling on the passive tree and should be able to almost completely counteract the nerf to Brittle Ground's base value with passive points that we basically would have wanted anyway. Ash, Frost, and Storm, Breath of Rime, and the Spiteful Presence Cluster Notable were all highly desirable even without scaling to Brittle Ground, and with it, the Elemental Mastery that gives Ailment Effect becomes a very attractive option as well. Ailment Effect was already useful for increasing the potency of our Vortex and Bone Chill combo, so being able to increase our base critical strike chance with it is borderline OP. Just be wary of the caps on the effect of Chill and Brittle at 30% and 6% respectively. Vortex and Brittle boots apply their ailments via ground effects, and therefore do so at the default values of 10 and 2%. Based on that, we can see that 200% increased effective ailments will maximize both. Keep in mind that Bone Chill has a built-in increased ailment effect, and we normally use unbound ailments with it, so it will cap out much sooner than Brittle as you stack global increases. But also keep in mind that some of the most dangerous monsters we'll face will be the arch nemesis mobs with reduced effective cold ailments, so being a little overcapped probably won't hurt. For better or worse, that's just about all the new information we learned from the full patch notes as far as this build is concerned. After looking over the new uniques, I'll definitely want to give the new Death Rush ring a test drive if it's affordable, since the Adrenaline mod has a lot of juice to it and we could always use another source of increased movement speed. I'll have to see how it feels before I give it my seal of approval though, since Adrenaline is one of the few buffs in the game that can't refresh its own duration, and I feel like that could make it awkward to actually use in practice. Another knock against it is that its procs are kill based, and so it will do absolutely nothing for us in a lot of boss encounters. The only other reworked uniques that remotely caught my eye were Obliteration and Bitterdream. They got major buffs, and might be nice boosts for a few levels in the early part of the build, but I don't think either of them have a chance of being even close to endgame viable. With respect to Obliteration, since we have no idea how much it will cost, it's impossible to know whether or not 2 Obliterations and the Malediction Ascendancy will be preferable to a pair of similarly priced rares and Profane Bloom. You're definitely not going to need both sources of explosion, so which option to choose comes down to the damage to price ratio of each. And while this ratio came down heavily in favor of rares and Profane Bloom in previous patches, it could look very different in 3.19. That being said, getting big numbers in POB from lots of chaos damage is fool's gold to an extent, since it won't help us freeze anything. Overall, if Obliteration is cheap, it might be a nice pickup for a while, but there will absolutely be rares that are far superior in the endgame, and sacrificing the cold damage scaling potential of rare wands for extra chaos damage is likely to have a negative impact on your survivability. Similarly, the new Bitterdream is cute, and I might use one for a few maps if I found it while leveling, but according to my theory crafting efforts, it will quickly be surpassed by a 5 or 6 link with level 20 support gems and even halfway decent weapons. So there's little chance that it will be involved in any endgame viable loadouts. It also comes with a massive increase to the mana cost of our BV, which can't be ignored, and may require more investment in reservation efficiency, maximum mana, and mana regen to compensate. Lastly, Ice Bite is useless on many bosses without a secondary way to generate frenzy charges. I've addressed the problem with frenzy charges for BV in the modern era at length in a previous video, but suffice it to say I find them very suboptimal. Before I go, I want to address the elephant in the room, the reworked Trickster Ascendancy. I know a lot of BV enthusiasts are as intrigued as I am by the newly open build possibilities, and I intend to do plenty of theory crafting about it. So if I do wind up posting a POB, please keep in mind that that's all it will be, theory crafting. By contrast, the Elementalist into Occultist build has been thoroughly tested over numerous balance patches before and after the buffs to BV's damage, and even in SSF. So I'll personally be sticking with it for my league starter. At a glance, I think Trickster will be viable and may even outclass the Occultist on a mid to high budget low life energy shield build. But it's way too soon to endorse it as strongly as I endorse the tried and true witch-based league starter in the POB linked below. Anyway, that's all for this video. I'll be back with my post-league start update and may even have another small update before the launch. I'll also definitely be streaming my league start on Twitch, and I'm always happy to answer any questions. So if you're going to be blasting this build along with me, come say hey in the Twitch chat or join the Discord for more BV discussion. And as always, stay painless.